Welcome to what I will call the final NCAA preview show for Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the youngster Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter. Kevin, this is our last preview show. And our preview shows, it's funny, we've done two. We broke them up into two regions, and they went like an hour and 15 minutes, somewhere in that range. And honestly, while we were doing them and we got done, it felt like they were 5 minutes long because we just kept flowing through them. There's so much to talk about. It felt to me like it was 5 minutes of talking. And then when I get done and I record it, I'm sitting here going, and we flew through these games. We could have spent another hour talking about the field of 64. But we did talk about the field of 64. 2 episodes out there. Now we're down to 4. Why don't you give, like, your little thoughts so far on the field of 64, the 2 shows that we did, just a quick wrap-up in your mind?
Well, I mean, I guess we ended last show basically saying that, okay, if there's a region that can go crazy, Troy picked it. The old man went crazy and picked a bunch of upsets. And just because we're a Big Ten show doesn't mean, you know, we're picking Purdue and Michigan to go to the Elite Eight. I'm not. Troy is. And I fully respect that, and I could fully seeing it happen. The Midwest region could go nuts. I texted them after the show saying, you know, basically, I don't think you're crazy. The Midwest has 5, 6, maybe 7 teams that could make legitimate runs in that region. So there are a number of teams that can do it. Purdue and Michigan are 2 of them. And to say that Purdue can win the national title, I honestly don't think it's that crazy. To me, there are 10 talented teams in the field, more talented than Purdue. But Purdue's got, just looking at their lineup and what they can do inside and outside from 3, they're a complete team. They're just not as talented as teams like, you know, Kentucky and Kansas and Duke and Villanova. They're not that talented, but they are a very strong, complete team, and it takes a hot team like Michigan to take them down in overtime. You know, it takes that kind of performance from a team that's not completely elite. So crazy things can happen in the Midwest. We said in the South that it's North Carolina, it's UCLA, it's Kentucky, and then it's a bunch of whatever. On the left side of the bracket, we just got done with that show, and it was primarily chalk. I think we honestly had one difference in the West. I know we had one difference in the West, and I think even in the East we only had 1 game different. But
yeah, it was crazy.
That's leading into our Final Four, and that's where we have the difference in the East. I have Duke, and you've got Villanova.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, it's like it's not a mirror. I mean, it's like that funny, crazy mirror at the amusement park where you walk in and it distorts your figure because you go on the left side of this bracket, and it really was a lot of chalk. We talked about it on the last show, that the discrepancy in talent, there was more on the left side, and unlike the right side, which we looked at, and yeah, I went crazy. Maybe it was too much kickstart, too much coffee. I have no idea. But I also thought on that right side of the bracket that the higher seed compared to the lower seed, the talent level was closer. And when you look at it, again, it comes down to matchups. I never thought in my wildest dreams, Kevin, a month ago, that I would have 2 Big Ten teams in the Elite Eight. I did not think I'd have anybody past the second round. I really didn't. The way that the Big Ten was playing out, I like Purdue. That's one of your favorite Big Ten teams this year. They've got a very good team. The problem with Purdue is they're so talented, I don't think they've really gelled it together. They can play great at times, but it's like they're still trying to find these pieces. They got knocked out in the first game of their second game, right? They won their first game. Is that correct? Man, it's been so long ago.
The double bye and then lost to Michigan.
Oh, that's right. They lost to Michigan. Yep. See, the old
no
age did it to me. Yeah. Maybe I need another kickstart. Get me going here. But to this show, Kevin, we're going to keep short. We're going to keep it simple. We did have 2 similar teams in the Final Four. We both had UCLA. We both had Arizona. Last show, we talked about it. You did your wink-wink that it's tough to bet against Arizona. They're a very complete team. They're a deep team. They play good basketball. They're gritty. They'll get at you. They'll rebound. They can shoot. To me, I look at Arizona in that bracket, and yes, Gonzaga's number 1. very easily Arizona could have been a 1 seed in this tournament. I just like everything that Arizona brings to the table. I have them playing Villanova. You have them playing Duke. And like I said, I could see your pick, the Duke pick, as much as I could see the Villanova pick. That is a game, especially when you get to that Elite Eight, you're looking at teams that have been battle-tested, that have veteran leadership. You talked about it a number of times, good guard play good defense, and very easily I could have tilted over to Duke's way. That Villanova-Duke game, to me, getting to the Final Four was probably the hardest pick of all four. The Arizona one, I looked at it against Gonzaga and went, it is what it is. That's where we go. And then UCLA over North Carolina, I just like UCLA's offense. We talked about it. You got to score points. And, I know that people will say, and we just mentioned it, you got to play good defense. But I really like what UCLA brings to the table offensively. They just got some raw talent out there, and I think they can shoot the lights out. That's why I put them in the Final Four. And then Purdue comes from that crazy bracket. I like Swanigan. I think he's a player that can change the momentum of a game. He's definitely a guy that can change the tide. And once they get by and they make their run, then they got to meet up with the old Michigan in a rematch. And I don't think Michigan gets the best of them then. I think Purdue has a chip on their shoulder, and it's crazy how it worked out. I did not think that I would have a Big Ten team in the Final Four, but it worked out that way, Kevin, for me. And I know, as we look at it, that Purdue team we've talked about them all year. If they could put it together and the young guy, Edwards, can basically play the tournament of his life, and this is the stage to do it, Kevin. How many times over the past 15, 20 years have you seen a no-name guy make a name for himself in March? And it's now Edwards' time. This is a guy that could step on that floor and make a name for himself as this tournament rolls around. So I look at it from that standpoint. I'll let you, talk about why you made your picks, and then we'll talk about who's going to be playing in the final and who our national champions are.
Yeah, I'm with you with Purdue. I mean, you said it, they're my favorite team over the course of the season for college basketball. Not in total, but for the Big Ten. They're just the most complete team. They don't have too many downs. Occasionally they'll play down to an opponent. I think I saw them losing really early against Penn State one night, and they eventually barely turned it around and got the win. But it was a poor played game by Purdue, which just speaks to how college basketball is this year. Every team's gotten beaten, even Gonzaga and their weak conference schedule. That's where they slipped up. They beat Arizona. They beat Iowa State. So they didn't slip up there. They slipped up in conference. And all these teams are susceptible to being beaten. And I talked about the 16 seed that plays Gonzaga in the first round and how that's not a bad 16 seed, realistically. If it were to happen, if I were to put money on a 16 seed to beat a 1, it would probably be that one. Gonzaga is an absolutely complete team, but just when looking at the 16 seed and having the nation's second leading scorer, a 6'9" forward who can step out, that's not a bad thing to have on your team going against a Goliath, so to say. So I think Gonzaga's susceptible. I think everyone's susceptible. There's no juggernaut. There's no team that requires another elite team to play at an elite level like a Kentucky a few years ago where it took a great game by Wisconsin to barely beat them. There's no team like that. Every team can be beaten. So Gonzaga, Arizona, I'm with you. I'll talk more about Arizona. I could talk about Arizona for a while. They're, again, wink, wink. They're my pick coming out of the West and playing against my favorite Dukies. But I had Villanova initially beating Duke, so I'm with you that I'm somewhat on the fence. And I don't think it's my fandom of Duke getting the best of me because I never picked Duke to win the title. I never ever do. That's just me being overly critical on Duke, I think, but I never pick them to win. So it bit me a couple years ago, but it is what it is. Anyway, I think Duke just has more of an inside presence than Villanova. And last year's Villanova team had an NBA big on the team. He's gone. Now their leading rebounder is at 6'9". Duke's got a couple 6'9" guys, so typically opponents against Duke like to thrash them on the inside, and that's something Villanova can't do. That's why I went with Duke, but Villanova is strong across the board outside of having an NBA-level big. So they can absolutely beat anyone, but they are a little susceptible inside. Every team's got a little nick in how they're built, but I think Duke barely gets on. I like Arizona a lot, so I've got Arizona and Duke on the left. And then the right, I'm with you. I love UCLA's offense. I could talk about a number of their players. Offensively, they're the best team in college basketball to me. Defensively is where their nick is. So if they're to be beat, it's getting beat 91-86. That's just how you're going to have to beat UCLA. And Arizona's done it, but it's very tough to do. Love UCLA's offense. And then the Midwest, where Kansas, I think, is certainly susceptible inside. They've got one big guy who's not going to be in the NBA. So that's where Kansas is lacking, where they typically don't. So having Swanigan, having Haas, if you're Purdue, if that matchup does indeed happen, and it can, because Purdue just has to get by Vermont, I believe it is, in the first round, and then they probably play Iowa State. Iowa State's a smaller team. Nevada's got a couple NBA players going against Iowa State, but Iowa State's really hot right now, so we both have Iowa State moving on. Purdue plays a small Iowa State team, probably gets by them because of their bigs. Then they can get by Kansas because of their bigs. Again, if Edwards is shooting, Carson Edwards, the freshman guard, is having the tournament of his life and shooting well from the outside, that's a scary 1-2 punch inside with a 7-1 guy in Haas and Swanigan, a potential player of the year, throughout basketball. Not just the Big Ten, but throughout basketball. It's a heck of a 1-2 punch they have inside to go along with their shooters on the outside. That's why Purdue's a very complete team. That's why I've liked them all year. So riding Michigan to the Elite Eight if you're Troy, and Purdue matching up against them again, it's funny that an Elite Eight matchup could be the quarterfinal matchup of the Big Ten conference tournament, yet we've been playing the Big Ten all year. So I fully understand it. I've got Louisville in that bracket going against UCLA, but you've got Purdue, and I could certainly see it happening.
Well, and I'll tell you, and again, you look at the picks, all of our picks, you look at all the teams that we picked in there, all of them would have a legitimate resume to throw at somebody and say, this is why we deserve to be there. Louisville's a good, solid team. I just think you got a hot Michigan team that can actually take them down and beat them with some outside shooting. But again, the Louisville team, I could see them being in the Final Four too. You had mentioned on all the shows that you have like 10 teams that could legitimately be there at the end. You can only have 4. You can only have 4 of them in the Final Four. That's why they call it the Final Four. So when I look at it, I'm not going to sit here and go, how in the world did you pick Louisville, Kevin? Or how in the world could you pick Duke? I mean, you get to that part of the tournament, and unless you've done something crazy like me and picked Purdue and Michigan in the Elite Eight, which is totally crazy, but not really totally crazy, Louisville is a team that, again, playing in that ACC with the likes of North Carolina and the Dukes, they're, I think, overshadowed this year, Kevin. That's another team, if they wouldn't have had maybe a couple blips here and there, in my mind, that's a Louisville team that very well could have been deserving of a number 1 seed, like the Arizona team. So you're talking about those teams, and maybe it's the parity this year in college basketball that you have so many that could slide into that number 1 line. But if the rankings would have came out and the seeding would have came out and Louisville would have been a number 1, I wouldn't have shaken my head. I wouldn't have said anything. I would have been like, oh, okay. Kind of out of left field a little bit, but that's a good, talented team. So, yeah, I have some surprises, but I always have a bracket like that. But to be honest, you could see Louisville and Kansas in the Elite Eight. I mean, you really could. That's the way that bracket is shaking out. I just went through the middle, brought some other seeds in there. But as far as UCLA and my pick, UCLA-Purdue, I have my championship game, Kevin, is Arizona versus UCLA. That is my championship game. What is your championship game?
Oh, man.
Don't tell me.
It's insane.
Do not tell me that your championship game is Arizona-UCLA. Do not even tell me that.
It's insane because like we've said on every show, I think that we've done together, we don't script our shows. And we're a couple Big Ten podcast guys. We don't script our shows. We don't try to be similar. We don't try to be different. A lot of shows try to be different to bring up a spark in their debate. We don't try to be similar, but here we are in a 68-team field, and we have a 2 seed playing against a 3 seed from the same conference in the Pac-12 in the title game. I have Arizona moving past Duke because I think they are a deeper team. I like their well-roundedness. They have the bigs to give Duke frustrations inside. Arizona can play elite defense on the outside, so Duke's going to have their hands full. I think Duke, realistically, is the second-best team in the country behind Arizona, but it's just how the bracket's formed that UCLA, I think, is probably the third-best team. And so I have UCLA beating Louisville. Louisville, if there's one thing against Louisville, and you want to bring it up, it's their inability to score. As long as their 2 guards are not scoring and shooting well, Louisville can have problems. That's where their little nick is. So they play elite defense. They've got 7-footers. They've got tons of length. Their guards are exceptionally well. They're just not exceptional shooters. They're great leaders. They're really tough. They handle the ball well. They make good decisions. They're just not great from behind the three-point line. They're not excellent shooters. So Louisville at times can struggle to score because they don't have that inside scorer that they can absolutely go to. They just have a ton of size and a ton of rebounding and a ton of length. So they're a well-rounded team. They just don't have great scoring options, so to say. Typically, one of their guards plays really well and scores 25 points and does it exceptionally well, and their defense plays really well, and so they just beat you. But if there's something to Louisville's game that you can knock, it's their inability to score at times. That's not an inability, a problem with UCLA. UCLA will score no matter what defense they're playing against. So I have UCLA moving on. I have Arizona moving on, just like you, Troy.
So I'm breathless, speechless. I don't know what to say. I'm going to start stuttering soon. Like you said, we couldn't have sat down and scripted it this way. So I'm hoping that our national champion is different. I really am. And I think it is, because you did the wink wink. I just am going to say, going against everything that I say you need in a tournament, which is good defense, rebounding, blah, blah. I'm going offense. I'm going UCLA in a big shootout. I know you got to put the score in for the tiebreaker. My score of the national championship game, UCLA 91, Arizona 84.
Could fully see it happening. There's nothing wrong with saying that UCLA is going to score 90 points throughout this tournament. They play Kentucky, most likely, who likes to get up and down. Wichita State, I guess, would slow them down if Wichita State were to advance. Dayton would likely get up and down with UCLA in the Sweet 16. UCLA, again, they're just an offensive powerhouse that can score at literally any position. Thomas Welsh inside is one big who will probably stick around the program for a while just because he's overshadowed by other guys like Lonzo Ball, TJ Leaf on the inside, Alford on the outside shooting from deep. This team has a number of scorers. Holiday, he can shoot from the outside. He's a playmaking guard. He can defend. It's a great UCLA team. And to say that they're the third best team in the country, in my opinion, that's not a knock on them. They're the best offense without question. I just think Arizona brings a toughness factor to them,
yes.
And I think they're tougher on defense. So I like Arizona over UCLA. Yes. We are finally different. But wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's hard to pick against Arizona. I just think they're the most complete team. I like the way they play defense better than UCLA, and offensively, they've got so many parts that can hurt you inside, outside, from three. Having Alonzo Trier back and healthy and fresh, he's a key player for Arizona. He was out for a while at the beginning of the year. That's why Arizona lost to Gonzaga, at least part of the reason why. So I like Arizona's completeness over any other team in the field this year.
Well, like you said, Arizona defensively, when you compare the two, Arizona and UCLA, I don't think they want to play defense, Kevin, to be honest. And so that's why I say if somebody says they can't play defense, I will disagree with them. I'm not going to say they can't play defense. I don't think they want to. I think they just want the ball back and they want to go down and score because they can score. They can score 7, 7 players deep on that roster and not miss a beat when somebody comes off the bench. So, again, I'm going against what I normally say, that you need to be great on the boards, you need to play great defense. That's what's going to win you a championship. I'm going against it this year because every once in a while you find that team. You find that team that's special, that can score and just extend games and make you have to score point for point, and that's UCLA. The other thing I like about great offenses, Kevin, is we talk about basketball being a game of runs, 10-0 runs, 11-1 runs. It happens against all teams, even the great teams. It happens. UCLA can shoot themselves back into a game just like that. 30 seconds later, but down by 8, they can be up by 1. That's how quick UCLA can turn the tide of a game. I like that. Arizona, another solid team. I mentioned it in the first round of the picks on the show before this. Hard to pick against Arizona, and that's why. They're a complete team. They're a deep team. They do play great defense. I think it's going to be one heck of a national championship game. If it happens to be UCLA and Arizona, Kevin, you and I will then be named college gurus. We really will. Because how do two co-hosts of a show that live miles and miles apart, do not confer and do not compare notes, all of a sudden go into a show and pick the same 2 title contenders? I said it on the last show when we did our bracket with one wrong. That's crazy. That is eerily scary. It's even more scary now that we picked the same 2 teams in the title game. It's just downright scary.
And we're a Big Ten podcast. We're a Big Ten podcast picking the second place and third place Pac-12 schools to meet up again in the national title game. That was the Pac-12 semifinal. Chris Boucher went down for Oregon. Their big guy, their leading shot blocker, so that knocked Oregon down a bit. But so we have the second and third best Pac-12 teams playing in the national title. Troy's got the quote-unquote best Big Ten team in Purdue playing against the quote-unquote 8th best team in the Big Ten. That's where Michigan was ranked in the Big Ten tournament, meeting in the Elite Eight. So we're a couple Big Ten guys, I guess, so to say, picking a couple Pac-12 schools who didn't even win their conference in the regular season. It's crazy how similar we are on the left side of the bracket and at the end, but thank goodness we have a different winner.
Yeah, thank God, because otherwise this young versus old thing that we're putting out there to market's not going to work. It's crazy. It might tell you this, though, Kevin, that there is, as much as we talked about college basketball this year, I've mentioned it now a couple times on this show, the prior show, the discrepancy level there, even though at the top there's not that juggernaut, as you call them, there's still a handful of very good teams that should dominate the lower-seeded teams. Because it's not like parity where you can have the 16 is going to go out there and have a great chance to win. I mean, you mentioned it, and I mentioned it on the last show. So if you did not listen to our prior show, had the 8-9 seed been different, I may have picked that upset over Gonzaga just because I think Gonzaga is a team that can go down, as is any other of these number ones, the number 2s. But when you look at it, there's the teams that we picked are all deserving. Purdue might be a stretch. I know that. But the way that it worked out, I just like the matchup against Kansas. Had that matchup, Kevin, been against Arizona, I'm not picking Purdue. So, again, it comes down to the matchup and where you're seated and how you go through the bracket. There's a lot of things that went through my head in that. Same thing with Michigan. Different seed, different region, different matchup. Maybe I have them losing in the second round. But the way that I looked at the matchups, I liked them. They just happened to get favorable matchups. It's just crazy that we have the same 2 teams in the final. But I'm going to tell you what, that's why we enjoy doing it. We enjoy it. We will get back with the listeners every day that there's a tournament game. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I hope Coach Goodpaster can keep up with us, Kevin. I've got to go buy another 4-pack Kickstart to keep me up because tomorrow's going to be a wonderful first day of the NCAA tournament. I cannot wait for tournament basketball to start. What about you?
the best 4-day stretch of the year by a mile. Starts tomorrow.
Lots of kickstart. No, as you said, no time for sleep. Lots of kickstart, no time for sleep. Just do what you got to do to stay up and get at 'em. But for the youngster, Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Kid Cunny on Twitter, I am Old Man Troy. You can find me at TroyRobert967. Hope you enjoyed our Final Four preview. Enjoy NCAA basketball, everyone. Kevin and I will get back with you tomorrow.
Go Zona.